If you're new to sewing with stretch fabrics, then this video is for you. Hi friends, welcome back to Karla Created. I'm Karla, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my top tips for sewing with stretch. These are the things that I wish that I knew when I first started sewing. It would have saved me so much frustration and headache and failure. But hey, from my failing and learning, I'm able to now share with you, so then you can perhaps avoid some of the common mistakes that I made when it comes to sewing with stretch. Let me just quickly describe to you what stretch fabric actually is. It is fabric that can stretch and then return to its original shape once it is relaxed. It is often made from elastic fibers like elastane, spandex, or lycra, or from knit fabrics made with looped fibers. Now it can be two-way stretch or four-way stretch. Four-way stretch essentially means that it stretches in pretty much any direction, and two-way stretch means that it only stretches sort of one way, like it won't stretch in all directions basically. So that's important because it really depends on what you're wanting to make out of the stretchy fabric, which will determine whether you buy a four-way or a two-way stretch. Personally, I opt to buy a four-way stretch at all times because it's just easier to use the scraps or use the remnants to make other things with. I get it. Sewing with stretch can be really daunting, particularly if you've had a go already and potentially failed kind of dismally. The number one rule when it comes to sewing with stretch is you need to have a ballpoint or jersey needle, which is a needle that has a rounded tip, so then it glides through the stretchy fabric much more easily. And you also need to use a zigzag stitch. This is to retain the stretch of the fabric. If you don't use a ballpoint needle or a zigzag stitch, you will have skipped stitches. You will also not retain the stretch, so your seams will just snap when you put the item of clothing on, if that's what you're choosing to make with stretch. And you obviously will not get the result that you're after, and it will be a pretty disheartening experience. Apparently, a size 70 ballpoint needle will work better for lightweight stretch knit fabrics, and a size 90 for heavier double knit, thicker stretch fabrics. Also talking about needles, there are different types of needles that you can get for domestic sewing machines to give you a certain stitch look. And what I mean by that is often you'll see on stretchy fabric garments like t-shirts and things, especially when you're buying them from, say, commercially produced mass market, ready to wear items, they will have a double stitch hem, which looks really nice and neat and professional. You can achieve this same look in two different ways. You can achieve it by buying a twin ballpoint needle, which you can use to top stitch your hem on your stretch garment that you're making. This will give you the look of a ready-to-wear item. The alternative is to use a cover stitch machine. Now, I don't have a cover stitch machine. I don't even use my twin needle that I do own because I just opt to do a zigzag stitch for all of my stretch garment hems. I'm happy with that. I don't really care about my me-made items looking as if they were purchased from a shop ready to wear. You might not be like that. You might want a more professional finish that looks like a ready to wear item, and that's totally fine. Get yourself a twin ballpoint needle, or you can purchase a cover stitch machine, which actually gives you that look in the same way, much more expensive though. Now, I just mentioned a different type of sewing machine. There is also a machine called an overlocker. Overlockers are amazing for sewing with stretch knit fabric. I got my overlocker from Facebook Marketplace. It was $100, and it is the best $100 that I have ever spent. It literally opened up my whole world when it comes to sewing. Overlockers are much faster than a domestic sewing machine, and they provide a much more accurate stitch when it comes to that zigzag or stretch stitch. So they're fantastic for stitching together stretchy fabrics. In saying all of this, you don't necessarily need an overlocker. You can, like I said earlier, get a ballpoint needle on your domestic sewing machine and use a zigzag stitch. That works just as well. But if you do want to invest in an overlocker, I can guarantee you it's probably going to change your life. Now, the next thing you need to be aware of is the stitch tension. Tension can get really confusing and completely mess with people. To be perfectly honest, it still messes with me. There's something in my brain that doesn't fully understand the concept. So my recommendation, if you're a little bit like me or a lot like me in that regard, just have a practice with adjusting the tension dial on the top of your machine. This is particularly important with stretch fabric because if your tension is too tight or too loose, it can actually stretch the fabric and cause wavy kind of seams, and that just doesn't look very, very good. The other thing you might want to do is just release or reduce the pressure of your presser foot. I personally have never done this when I probably should, but it is recommended if you have overly stretchy fabrics that run the risk of being stretched when you're sewing them, which brings me on to my third point. Handling the fabric when you sew with stretch is so much more important than with pretty much any other fabric, in my opinion. If you stretch your fabric when you're feeding it through your sewing machine, you're gonna cause issues with the final result. And that is because stretch fabric is designed to stretch and spring back. If you are stretching it as the stitches are going in, it's going to spring back and you're going to have stitches that have been made whilst the fabric was actually stretched out. So the seam or the stitch will be all buckled and wavy, like I mentioned earlier. This is so important, and look, to be honest, I still accidentally make this mistake sometimes, particularly with lightweight stretch fabrics, which are much more sort of pliable and easy to accidentally stretch. So one of the ways that you can avoid this is by using a spray starch or interfacing your seams and pinning them to keep them together. I personally don't do this because I'm more of the fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal, but there's some tips for you if you are struggling with this or if you want to avoid making this mistake. Spray starch can also be great to combat the rolling edges which often occur on stretchy fabric. The spray starch is good for that. I personally just iron the rolling edges. I find that it tends to sort of keep them a little bit flatter. They will still roll a little bit, but I find that ironing helps. I also use my sewing clips when I'm sewing with stretch because I feel that that combats that rolling edge a little bit more effectively than pins do as well. So that's another tip to keep in mind. And lastly, if you're sewing with stretch, you might want to consider getting yourself a walking foot. This is if you're attempting to sew stretch on your domestic sewing machine. I have a walking foot here on my Benina, and it is probably one of the best accessories that I have ever bought for my Benina. It is in fact the only accessory that I have ever bought for my Benina. And I have never taken it off apart from when I need to do a buttonhole. The reason why a walking foot is so helpful with stretch is because it helps avoid the point that I just made about stretching or distorting the fabric as you're sewing your stitches. It helps the feed dogs and the presser foot feed the fabric through more evenly. It has mechanisms in it that walk the fabric through from the top as well as the feed dogs from the bottom, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that would be my last tip that I would suggest looking into if you are wanting to sew with stretch, particularly on your domestic sewing machine. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope that it has left you feeling a lot more confident to start sewing with stretch knit fabrics. If you did find it helpful, or if I missed any points that you think I probably should have shared, let me know in the comments below, because like I said, I'm still learning. Despite being a sewist for 20 plus years now, my whole fly by the seat of my pants journey is ongoing. So please share with me any tips that I may have missed that you have learned over the years if you're more of an experienced sewist than I am. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, and as usual, subscribe to my channel if you like more content like this. I will see you in the next video. Bye.